It's like a Fanta of Fantavision said, you never know who's going to walk through that door when you're working retail. Last week, I went food shopping and on a weekday afternoon after my therapy sessions singular. Usually, at that time of day, there are no children to be seen because school is usually in session. But in the case of a weekday afternoon in the middle of summer vacation, there were a few, not every, not every single aisle is like, it's not like the kind of place that kids flock to, but you're more likely to have parents bring their kids along when they do that. I know because back in the day when my mom would take my brother, sister, and I to this, I don't know how you describe this outdoor place. I'm gonna look up the name. It's this non-profit educational organization. It was this private place with a lake that they paid a membership for, and we went there daily. Well, most days, most weekdays. Often, pretty much all the time against my will. On the way home, we would actually stop for food shopping, and I had fun selecting what I wanted. But I've gone on long enough about that. It's time to. The reason I'm talking about that is to say that there was a. When I went last week, there was one particular instance of disruptive behavior from children that I noticed, and whenever I happened to see them down the aisle I was gonna go down, I went down a different aisle and decided to circle back so that I didn't have to see it. I did hear the back and forth of the exchange between the parent and the children. That situation last week is actually why this article caught my attention. Is it fair to be judged by your kids' behavior? By Catherine Geiser Morton for New York Magazine. And you can see the illustration of a mother with a well behaved child being awarded a #1 ribbon. So, yeah, I'm not judging what I witnessed at the grocery store. It happens. I just decide to go around to a different aisle and then come back to that one when it's clear, which I do a lot when I see even a couple of people in that aisle. But that being said, I'll admit, I do sympathize with the child free people who want adult only grocery stores to be able to do that, but that's never going to happen because even if they could somehow feasibly do that, there's the question of whether they can legally do that. Again, I just move around and I wait until the aisle I want to go down is clear so that I can move around comfortably. But before we get into the article, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos, and comment what you think about all this. You know what? Let me know right now in the comments if you think people should be judged by how their children behave or not. There are good arguments both ways. They should be judged for it because their behavior reflects how good or bad of a parent they are. Or you can argue the child is a separate entity. They may or may not be doing everything they can, the parents that is. You don't know the full picture. Let's get into the article. We attended a family wedding last weekend, and my kids were tasked with helping direct cars into a field for parking. They really didn't have to do much more than wave and smile and point, but their enthusiasm for the task, perhaps combined with my younger son's choosing to wear a bow tie, made people happy. Later on at the reception, the kids chatted with the adults sitting at their table. They were polite, made eye contact with everyone, and weren't shy. People came up to my husband and me to say, "Wow, what nice kids you have." Did I tell them my kids agreed to help park cars only after we'd agreed to pay them $20 each? Of course not. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think that's something a kid should have been doing in the first place. I thought the whole reason that kids were not allowed to drive is because they don't have the cognitive judgment abilities, and I would have thought that this would be considered too dangerous because of the risk of a rogue car. I mean, I could understand them having a role in the wedding, like an uncle's wedding of mine when I was uncle of mine's wedding when I was 11. I showed people to their seats. I didn't get paid $20 for it, but I did get a framed Patriots photo as a thank you present at the rehearsal dinner. Anyway, getting back to the article, there are few things more satisfying than hearing praise for your kids. Mostly it's just nice to see them getting along well in the world. But a part of that praise reflects a flattering light back onto the parents, too. When a child is polite and personable, people tend to extrapolate that their parents must be good people, trustworthy and competent, people worthy of respect and deserving of inclusion, upstanding members of the community, even. Your child's behavior casts you in this golden spotlight. It feels amazing. But is it fair? Anyone who has taken a baby on an airplane knows there's nothing at all fair about being judged by your kids' behavior. I remember making our way off the plane after one flight my son slept blissfully through. It felt like being a minor celeb. Everyone smiled at us as we passed, the beautified parents of a baby who hadn't bothered anyone. "He did so great," an older woman whispered to me. A year later, my son was 2 and wailed inconsolably for the last hour of a flight. This time, our walk to the exit was met by weary looks, but mostly people just averted their eyes. Did I do anything differently from one flight to another? Not really. I didn't deserve the praise or the scorn. Both flights had been a roll of the dice. Any large crowd is a roll of the dice. It's like a Fanta of Fantavision said. You never know who's going to walk through that door when you're working retail. Terrible impression of him, I know, but I think you get the idea. He complained that working retail, you never knew who was going to walk through that door, and he's not wrong. Literally, any large crowd of people, you never know. Like the children who were acting out that I observed at the grocery store and the parent who had to deal with that. You never know if you're gonna see that happen. When I go to a movie, I never know who's going to be in the audience as well. Like in the last video, I talked about the trio who did not read the fine print and did not know that they were going into a premium format screening, and they left as a result of that because they got a taste of it with the previews. Anytime you leave the house, anything is a roll of the dice. Sometimes on a flight, if you are a parent with a small child, you're going to have people who are more sympathetic. Sometimes you're going to have people who are less sympathetic. I'll admit, I'm among those who would avert their eyes because I don't want to give them a hard time. I would prefer to just stay as far away from conflict as possible. I am an airbender according to the Avatar Studios quiz, so yeah, my evasive personality kind of reflects that. But the point is, people are going to judge you by how your kids behave if you are a parent. That's just the reality because your child's behavior can be interpreted as a reflection of your parenting style. Now, you could also argue that children should have playgrounds and such to get all their energy out, like they do on those European trains we saw in that Ashley Embers video. That being said, that's not going to happen on an airplane, not only because of seatbelt regulations, like you have to have your seatbelt on during when they say to have it on, and the fact that it would take up space that could easily go towards more seats that they could charge more money for. Now, you could argue playgrounds in the terminals, maybe you could see that. That might not be a bad idea. But I can also understand you need more space for people to be able to wait around, and there's also the liability issues you could get into. Again, me personally, I can see the argument that your child's behavior is a reflection of your parenting. You are assuming responsibility for that child. So, yeah, you kind of have to accept that people are going to judge. Me personally, I'll do my best to just look the other way and not contribute to giving you a hard time. Okay, the way that the article described the people who are looking away, maybe that's not as nice as it sounds when I actually think about it, but at a certain point, you have to make a choice. I would personally prefer just looking away and leaving it at that. Getting back to the article, this kind of judgment is a fact of life. Even when we know it's unwarranted, we let ourselves indulge. But when we judge parents by their kids' behavior, we are on some very embedded monkey brain shit, reverting to our most uncritical way of thinking, the kind that seeks out what feels good rather than what feels true. After all, it's only parents of kids who are well behaved who truly believe they deserve this kind of credit. I'd argue they deserve some credit for being able to get children to not be disruptive, because again, there is an element of your child is a reflection of your parenting. But that being said, there's also the question of sometimes there are things that are beyond their control. Like if you have an autistic child you have a hard time, who has a hard time with these kinds of things, that's a little more understandable. But people might not know that, and yes, it does trigger a certain monkey brain reaction. How'd you describe it? Embedded monkey brain shit, reverting to our most uncritical way of thinking. Yeah, some people are just going to instantly think right away, ugh, this is so annoying. That's a terrible parent. Me personally, I might get annoyed for like 3 seconds, but then I'll remember it's beyond my control. It's not my problem. Again, when I see this at the grocery store, I just turn around and I go down another aisle with the plan to come down that aisle after the misbehaving child and the parent are out of the way. No one feels the effects of this more acutely than parents of neurodivergent kids who struggle with social situations. We've come a long way from the days when doctors believed autism was caused by mothers who withheld affection. But even today, the world is really not predisposed to empathize with a kid who doesn't make eye contact. We all share the boomerly urge to coo over a responsive child, and when a child fails to respond or responds with hostility, the momentary frustration or shame we feel is a glimpse at some of our deepest held biases and fears about our children and ourselves. One subtle way parents of neurotypical kids can extend solidarity to parents of kids who are neurodivergent is to remember that our own kids' behavior is not a channel of our strength or weakness of character. True, I'll give them that. You can argue it's beyond their control. You can argue that the child having autism is beyond those parents' control. I do not pull it against them. Okay, this is getting into some third rail topics here, but I'm just going to say that people are going to get annoyed sometimes. I do my best to wait a few seconds and be as understanding as possible, or just walk away from the situation. Like when I'm at the grocery store, if I see disruptive children doing something, I just turn around, I go down another aisle, and plan to circle back to that one once they're not there. We all possess the lazy compulsion to find a link between what we can clearly observe, like a child's bad behavior, and some moral substance deep within. Maybe it's just the easiest way we have of ordering the chaos of our surroundings, but it leads to a lot of boneheaded thinking. It's the same habit Susan Sontag wrote about in Illness as Metaphor back in 1978. The book critiqued the connection people made in the 1970s between cancer and psychology. At the time, cancer was widely considered to affect people who repress their emotions, an idea that seems insane today. It wasn't uncommon for cancer treatments to include visits to a psychotherapist, not as a way of learning to cope with the diagnosis, but as a means of treating the cancer itself through the release of repressed emotions. Based on what I learned from stress reduction and mindfulness in college, there might have been a little truth to that. Like the stress probably contributed to the cancer cause, though really it's probably more likely they were smoking. And, well, I've mentioned before, smoking increases your risk of cancer over time, and that's probably what happened. Maybe they were in an environment like Walter White when he founded gray matter. Yeah, when he was doing the work at Gray Matter, that might have been. I think Skylar said something about that being the cause of his lung cancer in the show. But yeah, I guess today psychotherapy is probably not the best way to actually treat the cancer. I mean, I would argue at a certain point you've got to reduce your stress so that it can help. But obviously, the priorities should be the marvels of modern Western medicine and whatever else they can do to treat cancer, like that surgery Walter White got at the end of season 2. Getting back to the article, Sontag's larger point was that people have a tendency to think of illness as a metaphor for our inner states, a kind of manifestation of what's hidden. No one really believes this anymore, though RFK Jr. is definitely the type to buy this sort of BS. And it goes to show you how linked science is to culture. But we still make the same sorts of unscientific linkages between what we can observe and what we suspect to be the underlying cause. And there's no more frequent application of this faulty reasoning than those we associate uh, than when we associate children's behavior with the strength of their parents' character. I suspect if Matt Walsh were reading this, he would say, it's about how strong their parenting is, how strong their willpower is. And I can see it being a little more about the willpower to tell your kid, no, you can't act like this here. Or maybe giving them or maybe it's a difference between whether the children have an outlet for their energy somewhere else, so that when they go to, say, a grocery store, a movie theater, anywhere else where you're supposed to sit down and be quiet. Well, you're not exactly sitting around at a grocery store, but you get the idea. I would argue it's probably more about whether the kid has an outlet to get that energy out somewhere else. Yeah, that's probably more likely it. The strength of the parents' character, I would argue, is a bit so-so. Like, I mean, you could argue that if they have the strength of character to allow their children an outlet to get their energy out, then yeah, you could probably say that. But again, I think it really comes down to whether the kid has an outlet to get the energy out. I mean, you let me know in the comments down below which you think makes more sense. Because again, although the child is a separate entity from the parent, the parents do assume responsibility and liability. Therefore, it is something of a reflection of how they parent, but it's also, but there can still be something beyond their control, which is why, again, in situations like that where I can avoid it, if I see a disruptive child in a grocery store aisle, and regardless of what the parent's doing, I just go down a different aisle, and I'm like, I will circle back to this one later. If anything, I've observed the opposite to be true, Kids often seem to complement their parents for better and worse. Some of the most scattered and dissociative parents I know have some of the most conscientious children. I believe we lately use the word parentified for kids like this. While some of the sweetest, most tender-hearted parents are tasked with handling the toughest, most uncooperative kids. The only real through line I can see is that kids' characters are their own, and parents are powerless to change them except by encouraging certain habits and discouraging others. I see nothing wrong with this, except that the sweetest, most tender hearted parents being tasked with handling the toughest, most uncooperative kids, I think it would be more of an argument of not having the willpower to be like, okay, gentle parenting, that's probably the problem. And yeah, she's right that parents can only do so much up to a certain point. Yeah, it takes time, and that being said, I would argue anyone who wants to avoid an environment where there are disruptive children in like a grocery store and such to either use online pickup or delivery so that you don't have to worry about that. Again, my personal reaction to that is to just turn around, find something else to get in the store, and then wait for that aisle to be clear. This is not at all to say that parenting doesn't matter, but our influence manifests imperfectly and unexpectedly, and in different ways over time. Sometimes parenting is just a matter of teaching kids to fake good behavior in the hope that it will lead to something deeper developing on its own. My husband began teaching my kids about eye contact when they were in kindergarten. I recall finding it a bit old fashioned and severe, the way he'd insist that they look at him when speaking to him. He really drilled it into them. I had nothing to do with it. It's not how I was raised. And today, I reap the benefits. My kids are trained up in making the kind of polite eye contact adults love. It's true, my husband deserves credit for teaching our kids that. That was good parenting on his part. But is the habit of making eye contact a true sign of inner goodness? Absolutely not. My kids' inner goodness has nothing to do with the adult management training they received at a young age, but no one can tell the difference. We want to take credit for our kids' best moments and deflect responsibility from their worst, which is all the evidence we need that is all just storytelling meant to make us feel better about ourselves. Yeah, honestly, it is a bit more nuanced. Sometimes the parent is at fault, sometimes the individual child is at fault. Most of the time, parents are held responsible for their children's behavior because they are the legal guardians who are legally responsible for the child, and what they do is to an extent a reflection of them no matter what. Look, I'd rather say that everyone is an individual, but to an extent, there are always going to be people who judge judge people by the way their children behave if they have kids, or they're always going to consider their parenting a reflection of that. I don't know what I'm saying. I think what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's a thing that's beyond their control, or the parent might not have made a perfect decision. But you know what? I do my best personally not to give anyone a hard time if they have disruptive children. Actually, on my flight home from Florida last December, I remember there was a woman a row or two behind me with a baby. Wasn't very disruptive. Probably helped that I have my noise canceling AirPods Pro, but that's beside the point. The point is, I didn't give anyone a hard time, whether it's on that flight or when I was at the grocery store last week. Instead, I avoided the situation. I made sure that if I saw children who were acting disruptively in one aisle or another, if that was the aisle I was going down, I would just go down a different one to get something else while I waited for them to leave. Just that aisle, not the overall store. And it does have me thinking a lot about how, as I always say, the burden is on the child free people to figure out what public accommodations to avoid, whether it be restaurants, movie theaters, supermarkets. Again, it's why I don't go to see animated movies at the movie theater anymore. Well, movies made for kids. Except in certain situations like Sonic the Hedgehog 4 in 2027. I will be going to see that opening night. But other than that, oh, the Mario movie as well. Mario movie sequel, that is. I tend to avoid other movies like that that are admittedly aimed more towards kids, but I avoid seeing them at the theater, like Dogman. I intentionally waited for it to come to PVOD to watch that because I knew if I went there when it was in theaters, it would be crowded. There would be disruptive children in the audience, unless I went during school hours on a school day. Again, the burden is on you, the child free adult, to figure out what to do. Now, sometimes you can say that parents need to figure out a better timing situation. I'm not trying to place the entire burden on everyone. Obviously, parents should do their best to make sure their children are on their best behavior, or teach them to be on their best behavior, or give them an outlet to get their energy out so that they're not being disruptive at the worst possible time. But again, anytime you leave the house, it's a roll of the dice, like, what was her name again? Like Catherine said. The burden is on you to figure it out if you want to minimize your risk of there being a disruptive child somewhere you go. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here for the video. I've gone on a bit too long about this as it is. Let me know in the comments down below whether you think that people should be judged by their children's behavior, or whether you think that they should be considered separate entities. You give this video a like and subscribe for daily videos of cultural commentary from a man caught between generations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.